All right. Yes, we are getting on the stage and we'll wait for just 1 minute and get started.
Okay.
All right. So let's get started now. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Smita Mishra, founder and CEO of Pandoro Technologies. Pandoro is built with a vision to enable the investors and businesses of the next economy to be more responsible by helping them identify and manage their sustainability related goals, ESG risks, and opportunities. Founded in 2018 in India, we are a fast growing consulting firm powered by a SaaS platform that enables leaders of today and tomorrow to be planet positive by helping them in monitoring and managing their ESG metrics and sustainability impact. We support our clients with bespoke consulting services and offer remote sustainability team in case they have limited or no teams to work dedicatedly on their sustainability roadmap. I welcome you all to this edition of the Responsible Investor and Businesses webinar series. The series was created as a forum for discussion to engage with the real partner actors and sustainability practitioners who are actively working and taking real actions towards adopting sustainable development practices in their investment and private businesses space. We wish to have this as the platform to build awareness on sustainability and the current industry practices, discuss successful existing solutions, and also exploring newer innovations for solving the complex and interrelated challenges of sustainable development to minimize the negative impact while maximizing the positive impact of businesses and investors on the environment and society, and doing all of this with a good, transparent, and effective corporate governance. A critical topic of interest and debate is, of course, around the climate change impact and actions taken by private businesses. Given the growing interest and genuine curiosity on this topic, we are holding a series of webinars on this topic to discuss and debate the various viewpoints. Today is the second in this series of Responsible Investors and Businesses series of webinar. The topic is IPCC, Significance and Impact on Private Businesses. Now, which is intended to explore the impact of IPCC reports on private businesses globally. Let me start the discussion today with some context setting on IPCC, and kindly excuse me for taking longer than usual for the introduction, but I think we need to just set up a quick context on this. IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is an it's a body, governmental body of the United Nations responsible for advancing knowledge on human-induced climate change. It was established in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme, and later endorsed by the UN General Assembly, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and of course 195 member states. The IPCC provides objective and comprehensive scientific information on anthropogenic climate change, including the natural, political, and economical impacts and risks and possible response options. It does not conduct any original research, nor does it monitor climate change, but rather it undertakes a periodic systemic review of all relevant published literature. So the IPCC is an internationally accepted authority on climate change today, and its work is widely agreed upon by the leading climate scientists as well as governments. Its reports play a key role in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and therefore the COP meetings. This year, on 28th February, the IPCC released its Working Group 2 report on impacts and adaptation, the second part of the four parts report of its sixth assessment report. The Working Group 3's Mitigation of Climate Change, the sub-report to the sixth assessment, was made available last month on the 4th of April with much impact. What is of our interest to discuss here is firstly the impact of the IPCC assessment reports on private businesses, and secondly, how do they plan to incorporate the changes the report suggests, and what are the potential unintended changes too that the businesses might cause. So before we get started with the session and introduce our esteemed panelists, quick housekeeping points here. The panel discussion will be about 40 to 50 minutes, and we plan to do the Q&A with audience for the last 5 to 10 minutes of the hour. Please submit your questions through the chat with your name and we'll raise them with the panelists. We would love to have this webinar interactive so it is useful and meaningful to you. Feel free to put your thoughts and questions on the chat. With that as the background, let's start the discussion with our esteemed panelists. Today, joining us on the panel are Peter Hall, who is the Vice President, Global Director for Climate Resilience and ESG at Wood, and Steve Jennings, founding partner of Vivero. Quick introduction on the speakers as I read their bios. Peter Hall, in his role as VP and Global Director for Climate Resilience and ESG at Wood E&I, he integrates sustainability and resilience into projects to deliver project outputs that support ESG performance. He is the director for the Wood Adapt for ESG Performance Framework and Resilience Lens Screen for Investments tool, developed in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. He's also on the Meridium Investments Resilience Committee for the Meridium PIDG Urban Resilience Catalytic Capital Fund, and an associate on the UN FCCC Climate Champions team to mainstream resilience for global impact. He manages the Wood partnerships with Resilience Rising and the Resilient Cities Network, a member of the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, and on the IPCC SUP Global Dialogue World Group. He has been a speaker at the World Forum, Global Infrastructure Dialogues, and at COP26. He's on the advisory board for the New Zero World campaign and film, and is based in Portland, Maine, and has been with the firm for over 35 years. Welcome, Peter. I'm really honored to have you. I'm really honored to have you on the panel with us. With that glorious background, one webinar may not do justice at all from what all we can learn from you. Quickly introducing our next panelist, Steve Jennings. Steve is a serial human and planet impact entrepreneur. He founded Maxim, one of Europe's leading active lifestyle sports nutrition brands, which was acquired by Orkla Foods. He was a founding member. He was a founding member of PepsiCo's Global Good for You Nutrition Innovation Team, and he was the co-founder and CEO of Good Cred, a Swedish company focused on customer journey engagement solutions and complementary currency innovation. Steve was the embedded entrepreneur in residence at Lund University's Open Innovation Lab in Sweden. He was the co-founder of Iovia. He was the co-founder of Iovia, a Canadian company focused on driving growth and creating new ways of doing business by unleashing the power of brand communities and creator participation. Steve is currently a founding partner of Vivero, an outcomes-driven innovation studio developing transformational business concepts focused on emerging global trends that will shape our future. He is the founder of Roshan, powering the journey toward regenerating net zero world by decarbonizing global value chains with intelligent Scope 3 carbon emissions, detecting, connecting, and tracking technology. Steve currently lives in Antwerp, Belgium. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
And wow, as I was speaking, I was smiling that I had to repeat what I said for Peter. Sorry, Steve, 1 hour is not going to be enough to hear all from you too. So honored to have you on the panel too. Okay, so let's get started for today. Again, a very warm welcome, Peter and Steve. While I read out your bios, it will be great to hear directly from you. Maybe a short introduction telling us more about your professional experience, your journey, and also maybe an intro of your company, particularly with respect to your role and with respect to sustainability. Feel free to highlight any initiative you would like to. We can start with you, Steve. You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. So, yeah, it was a really nice intro, Smita. Thank you very, very much. I don't want to kind of take up too much time, but my background, as you kind of explained, is very, very different to Peter's. But I think if Peter and I got in the same room, we'd actually realise that there are many similarities when it comes to heart space, why we get out of bed in the morning, and what it is that enables us to do the best and bring the best of ourselves into the world that we're now working in. I think for me, there are a number of kind of highlights in my career journey. I mean, clearly, spending time inside of PepsiCo, which is a huge global food company, gave me tremendous insights into the way that a Fortune 100 really has to play the game at a global level, whether it's supply chain, M&A, lobbying on Capitol Hill. All of the complexity is actually quite mind-blowing. And I think if people fully understand the complexity that resides within huge global companies, it helps you to understand why you can't turn a super tanker around in a year, maybe not even in a lifetime. To be perfectly honest with you, the changes required are immense when you look at what we're doing now and what's needed inside of huge companies. So PepsiCo gave me that experience of working within a very large global international company. Lund University and being an entrepreneur in residence on a university campus was, I never imagined that would happen in my lifetime, but it did. And that gave me insight into research, academia, and the amount of IP that was developed, and looking at ways to commercialize IP, working with brilliant people, really brilliant people. And that took me into a lot of what I call public spaces, public-private partnerships, trips to Brussels, having meetings with people working in government. So I had that private industry piece, Lund University, government, and that has given me quite a lot. It's given me enough insight to be dangerous and enough experience to be dangerous, and that's actually quite good. And then with Iovia, we were very lucky to get very deep and work very closely with Lego, Unilever, and Nike. And once again, even though that work wasn't specific to climate and sustainability, it enables you to understand the structure and the culture within an organization. Because the key to what all of us are doing now, and I guess this is the same for Peter working within a very large company, is navigating the narrative to the right people that make decisions, but also navigating that narrative to the entire organization. Like, if there's 160,000 people in a company, they need to understand the narrative. They need to understand their role in that narrative. You need to engage everybody. And if you can't engage the stakeholders within a company, you're going to really struggle to engage any suppliers when you start getting down to tier 6 and down to tier N, and you'll really struggle to engage your customers/consumers. So it really starts bringing, internally, and bringing the entire organization along. And that includes your shareholders, your investors, literally everybody. So that has been a big learning experience for me, going on this journey, having experience in large companies, and now bringing it to something that, it's all I'm doing, and it's all I intend to do is, how do you bring these new regenerative, sustainable, net positive solutions to the world, and how do you even go about, how do you scale them, but more importantly, what are we working towards? And I think part of what I want to talk about today is the need is here and now. The need was probably 2 decades ago, but the need now is so urgent. But I think we need to really get clear on what are we working towards. A lot of people that I'm talking to in large companies, medium-sized companies, experts in this space, they're struggling to paint the picture of 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And that we have to create that world and then come back to where we are now and reverse engineer and design for where we need to get to. We're reacting. We've got to move away from this reacting all the time to it's a long journey, a really long journey, and people need to know where they're going on this journey. And I may not see the output in my lifetime, but my kids and my grandkids hopefully will. And this is such a long play. And once you understand that framework, it's very difficult what we're doing, but it makes things a little bit more digestible and understandable, and I think it creates even more of a sense of responsibility, because we're paving the way for people that have not yet even been born. Unless we do this, we know what will happen, and we don't want that to happen. So that's enough of me, and now over to you, Peter.
Yeah, it perfectly matches what you're saying, Steve. So where I work, it's a large engineering infrastructure energy company. Large, 40,000 people, global. We do a lot of work for some of the clients you just mentioned, Steve. So in addition to creating a shift within an engineering consultancy company, we also create projects and basically provide roadmaps for our clients. What you just mentioned too, one of the things I've done the last couple of 2 or 3 years is we did scenario planning. So what the world's going to look like for energy and infrastructure in 2030, sustainable infrastructure, energy transition. And my job over the last couple of years has been to operationalize the strategy. So take where we're going to get to, what infrastructure is going to look like in energy, and then actually put it into a structure that we can get into, like you mentioned, a clear narrative within our company, get it through our board, our ELT, key customers, and then take that. Now, what I'm doing now is I'm actually wrapping this around ESG, which a lot of companies, we want to use that to drive energy transition, infrastructure, sustainability, nature positive, and social, as a common narrative for our clients. And it's interesting for a lot of what I do. Simply, it's connecting what we build, critical infrastructure, and the services from that to future climate. So, and that's a lot of what I'm doing. And then I realized years ago that we can never get this without partnerships. The idea we have to do it partnerships. So, so I've done, like you mentioned at the outset, submitted some work with Rockefeller. That it's a great. We built like a resilience screen to connect our work to finance, to create more bankable projects for finance with outputs. And then the work that I've totally enjoyed that I plan to do to the end of my career and beyond is working with the UN Climate Champions team. So, and this relates directly to the IPCC report, because even in a 1.5 world, and to be honest, if we make all the pledges, we're on a 2.4 world, and you're looking at 5.6 times higher heat, 14% wetter, bigger storms, more rainfall, those aren't going to go away when we meet our goals. So I was at COP26 and they rolled this out, and it's going to be rolled out much bigger next year, is you have to do the energy transition, but at the same time you have to do resilience. You have to do adaptation and resilience together. That's a big part of what the IPCC 6th report that just came out is about. Is we have to build an adaptation and resilience alongside, and actually in step with energy. And no surprise to folks in the call, the most vulnerable people, the people that are the least responsible for the climate issues, are the most responsible. So there's a big focus on how can we do this work very intentionally and improve lives and livelihoods. And a lot of the work, and this reflects what I do at Wood actually, is a focus on urban, so solutions for urban and cities, rural farm holders. We do some of this, especially around water and supply chain, and then coastal. So it's the idea. Now we have the science, right? It's there. It's been there for a while. What do we do with it? So, and the panel that I'm on now through the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure is a working group to basically take the policy outputs and come up with scalable solutions around adaptation. So that's a lot of what I do in my day job and my seconded job to the Climate Champions team.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there, Peter, with what we're currently
Steve,
working on. No, it's good. Please, Smita.
So sorry. Yes. So thank you, Steve, and thank you, Peter. That was such a smooth representation of a very complicated and critical situation that we are into right now. So thank you for actually mapping your work and then actually talking about the significance of your work and your organizations, along with the real problem that we are really facing. And you rightly said, Steve, we are not in a position to be able to tell our future. We have to try to look at what we want. We're trying to backtrack, back calculate, trying to build something so that we may potentially have a better future than what we are probably headed towards. So nicely put together. Thank you so much. So very quickly getting straight into the IPCC 6th assessment report. Did you guys get a chance to look through all the 17 chapters? I find it very surreal that there are 17 SDGs, then there are 17 chapters to.
Smita, your screen is frozen.
That's just.
There you go.
Yeah, if you want to, I mean, I can. We've looked through that in our working group, and if you want, I can just quickly run through some of the key points. And it tees up a lot of what you were talking about, Steve. Is the translation of science for both scale and accessibility. So it's taking the science now, which is it's out there, it's proven, and to really push that out into to action. I think you mentioned, Smita, the IPCC. They're a policy group. They're not really a group that's going to come out with recommendations for action. They're a policy group. So this is the working group that I'm on now is a bridge to action, which is called for in the sixth report. So some of the other things that really jumped out for me is, and this is across the different sections, but they're really pushing for a more integrated approach. So they're really pushing collaboration. There's a big emphasis on regional climate change. No surprise that, extreme heat's going to be different in some areas than in others. Rainfall is going to be different. It depends on topography. It gets into landslides and other issues. So the idea that it's great to have the global numbers, but to look at it regionally, especially in Africa, that's some of the work I'm doing, the Climate Champions. It's interesting that they're not looking just at extremes, they're looking at what I call stresses. So big events, but also chronic stresses. It could be rainfall over time. And what keeps coming back in our group and when I'm reading through it is this real push from global to local, which is a real big part of the Climate Champions work. It's great to have global, like their ambition is to improve the resiliency of 4 billion people by 2030. Great goal. We're now working with John Doerr and the OKR group, Speed and Scale group, to break those down into really specific OKRs, which gets us to the local level. A push to involve local policymakers, and actually there was a big push in here on shared social economic pathways, so that the connectivity of pathways, which I thought was really interesting. And then a couple other points. I think the cascading effects. It's talked about, maybe not as much as it should be, but urban wildfires is increasingly going to become a huge climate issue. And a cascading issue, because that also relates to then increased runoff, landslides. It gets into agriculture. It's a lot of cascading risks. But for me, the main thing, last two things, is the role of cities. So I do work with the Resilient Cities Network. So they have cities around the world where they're trying to improve their resilience. This science really informs what cities need, what they need to do, where they need to get to. And then just in general, the report just puts a lot more emphasis on adaptation. So here's where we're going to be around heat, flooding, the key climate shocks. How do we improve lives and livelihoods and help people adapt? And how do we adapt critical infrastructure to these changing climates? So those are some of the things that stood out in the report for me as a start, I guess.
No, I think, Peter, you've covered yes. Most of the main, in fact, all of the main points. And I think my key takeaways from the report. We know this, but sometimes the way it's framed is quite helpful when you want to share information with people that don't fully acknowledge or accept that humans and human interventions are probably having the single biggest impact on where we are today. I think the challenge that we have is that it's like, in the language of, businesses, or the kind of world that I've been operating in for many years, businesses are looking for growth that is hockey stick to the right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, at the moment, we are experiencing hockey stick to the right for all the wrong reasons when it comes to climate, whether it's the dependency that we have on fossil fuel, whether it's the economic model that we've created over the last 60, 70 years that has made consumption very, very cool and aspirational. And it's going to be extremely difficult to wean ourselves off the world that we've created. And I think, once again, this comes down and back to the narrative. Things are going to change, and I know you, Peter. You live in Portland, Oregon. So
Portland, Maine.
Pardon? Oh,
Portland,
Maine.
Maine.
Okay. Well, I did live on the West Coast. I lived on Vancouver Island up until only 2 years ago, and it's a very nice part of the world, the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
But the reality for me around climate change was when we didn't see the sun for nearly 2 weeks because of forest fires that are out of control. And that really was a significant personal wake-up call for me. Literally, you didn't see the sun. The sky was orange, and this lasted for 11 days. And you're living in this pristine part of the world. And subsequently, as Peter was mentioning, we're seeing firestorms, both rural and, more importantly, urban. We're seeing changes to the climate that are unprecedented certainly in any of our lifetimes. We have not experienced some of the things that have happened in the last 5 years, and that is only going to get worse. And I truly believe that the biggest challenge, and don't get me wrong, the science is there, all the science exists, and most of the technology solutions that are needed actually exist. We don't really need to invent very much net new. And going to Peter's point, we need to start getting competitor companies, and companies that aren't even working in the same industries to start to create new collaborations, to forge new partnerships that could be very unusual. And you start bringing the best brains in the world into the right environment, and then you start to see solutions through a fundamentally different lens. We have to be able to package this up in a way that brings along every single living thing on this planet. Human, animal, everybody has to come on this journey with us. And that is ultimately going to come down, once again, to how do we communicate that? How do we get everybody on board? How do we get everybody on board? Because we've sold this amazing journey of base of the pyramid, the emerging middle class, and it's a compelling proposition, but it's led us to where we are today. We're experiencing the direct result of unprecedented economic growth for 2.5, 3 billion people that are benefiting from this. Opportunities for people that their parents, certainly their grandparents couldn't have conceptualized. Even their parents couldn't have conceptualized the opportunities that we now have. But we now are paying a very, very heavy price for this. And somehow we have to design a new playbook, new methodologies, new approaches. It is not going to come down to, can we develop the technology? The technology exists. Whether we can scale some of this technology, I don't know. But one thing that we know does work, and it's arguably going to be the silver bullet, is wrapping our heads around nature, biomimicry, and what the planet can actually do if we play the role of custodians. The rampant delogging, rampant deforestation is causing fires to spiral out of control. We need to really take a step back and look at the role that nature can play, the role that soil can play, the oceans can play, forests can play, and create what I call carbon sponges and turn cities into areas with smart urban planning where a city becomes a carbon sponge. And the technology exists right now to do that in every city in the world right now. That will create huge trillion-dollar businesses for companies that will scale up and for startups that will be needed to make that a reality. I think one of the things that I've really, for me, has been another aha moment is not getting sucked into the negative narrative, not getting sucked into a narrative around carbon emissions, carbon accounting. You have to look beyond that. They're mostly check boxes. They're a great piece of PR, but the reality is that we need something that is at the infrastructure level. We need to get into the roots of infrastructure and stop this pruning back. The pruning back is not going to get us to where we need to be. And it's at the infrastructure level where the big opportunities reside, the economic opportunities, the opportunities to regenerate and reimagine economies. Our future is all about the kind of infrastructure that's needed, because without the infrastructure, it's like building a technology platform. If you don't have that layer of infrastructure, you can't build anything. It's a house of cards. It doesn't work. It's full of bugs, and it frustrates and irritates people. So the infrastructure is where we need to be deploying trillions of dollars right now. And once we've got that infrastructure in place at scale globally, then we can start to realistically think about what needs to be built on top of that infrastructure. That's where it gets interesting from new business model perspective and entrepreneurs. And that's where it really touches citizens in the community, on their street, at the school. But I know Peter's working deeply in infrastructure at Wood. And our approach is very much about infrastructure. Because that's where they're the big levers. If you look at this in the context of what are the levers that a company or a government needs to pull, what are the big levers that can get us to a good place by 2025 or 2030, most of those levers are infrastructure at scale. That's both industrial infrastructure, but also infrastructure in the context of nature. How do we really reimagine regenerative agriculture? What can we do with the oceans as carbon sinks? Really understanding the role that soil plays, and really understanding the role that things like peat bogs play, moss, forest, trees. And when you bring those two together, the industrial component and the nature component, then you have everything that you need. That there's nothing more needed, and they're both layers of infrastructure.
Absolutely, Steve. Completely in agreement with you and Peter. But I find it difficult to wrap my head around some of the facts, and I'll just take the facts out of what you just said, both of you. So one of the statements Peter said was the focus is going from global to local. You want to look at more local climate change action and trying to contain those. And on one hand, he's talking about that, and I'll come to a couple of facts and just put them in bullet points, and then we'll discuss how do we wrap our head around what's really happening. One is, of course, the climate change is a global issue, but we want to focus on it as an action at the local end. At one end, we have, and again, I think Peter did mention that, there are people who are not responsible for this climate change, but are bearing the brunt more than others for doing that. I mean, for just maybe developing nations particularly. On the other hand, you, Steve, say that there's all the technology that's required. It's almost always, most of them is there. Of course, there can be, you can always keep evolving, but most of the technology solutions required are existing. People like Peter working for bigger infrastructure companies are coming forward and saying, we are into this, we want to do this, we want to make this happen. People like Steve who are developing these technologies, who are working on bringing these technologies to the forefront and helping such organizations like, let's say, Wood. I see you both working together. Like I see that there are solutions, there are companies who are bringing them together. There is a willingness in quite a large percentage. Then I look at the numbers in terms of the finance, the sustainable finance, which is growing every day. Every day there is a new number coming up, new record being broken in terms of sustainable finance, sustainable lending, green finance, social finance. It's like, okay, we are all doing everything right, correct? We are supposed to be winning this game because we are all doing it right. Where are we going wrong? I clearly understand. You did mention about, this love of commercialization and capitalism, and this love of spending more, buying more, this love of all this new industrialization. I understand that businesses are thinking only in terms of, a lot of them are thinking in terms of their stock prices as their end value, and they don't think of value they're delivering at every stage to all the stakeholders. Point taken. But I think we're going grossly wrong somewhere else, because there is so much willingness there. Their awareness is at a new heights, at all-time new heights. But what are we doing not correct?
I've got one comment to make on this, and I've had, since August of last year, I've participated and conducted more than 100 conversations with people that are working in this space, from people like Peter to people that are running at scale global companies, to people that are running at scale academics, entrepreneurs, everything. And I think my takeaway is that a lot of the people I've spoken to don't even know where to start. And even when they start on the journey, they're absolutely not sure whether they're starting in the right place. And secondly, they're quite unsure about why they're even doing it. They know why they're doing it, but they're also unsure. What is this going to lead to? And I think the most important thing...
Your returns on it, right?
Yeah.
What is my return on this?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to redefine the ROI. I mean, we know Triple P, all of those models have been around for years and years and years, but they still haven't been embraced as models that design the P&L, that design the way that you report your annual accounts or your quarterly numbers. And I know there's a lot going on with ESG, and there's some amazing, new generation carbon accounting companies out there. But, you see what these companies are doing, and it's amazing. But the need for what's happening now was 10, 15 years ago. So we've got this situation where lots of companies and individuals are reacting. And I think what we're going to realize, hopefully not before, hopefully sooner rather than later, is that we've been deploying vast amounts of capital in the wrong things. And yeah, really. And the challenge, but the need is we need the tools that are better able to inform us in terms of where does this capital need to be deployed. We think we know, but I'm not sure that we do. And when I speak to people that are working in this space who are deploying really significant amounts of capital, they're not sure, because the metrics that they're working with, the research that they're working with, the methodologies that have been used for the research, the way that companies are reporting their own carbon emissions is all over the map. It is just all over the map. And that's the problem. We're not working with a truly common set of standards that holds individuals and companies truly accountable, and a mechanism that enables companies to even understand what their baseline is. They don't have a baseline. So you're pouring resources into things that you think are going to deliver results, but we don't know. So we need tools that are better able to inform and to make sense of what really needs to be done. And there is no shortage of resource available, Smita, which you mentioned. There isn't going to be any shortfall of resource, but it's deploying that resource into the areas where we're going to get the most impact, and that's really difficult to do right now.
So, Peter, is that what you can do?
Yeah, a couple things. I think one of the issues, and we just play in in one space, but the sectors are really sectors are kind of siloed, so there's not as much sector coordination. So I mean by sectors, everything from food, water, energy, agriculture, data. I mean, the coordination there, it's lacking. And if you're a business, you typically work in one or two of those, so you don't really have a play in the others. And this is more of my not a bias, but feedback. And the energy stuff is great. We need to do that. I'll tell you that the focus for COP27, having been at COP26, it's a huge global bringing together and coalition that can really drive change. The actions out of it can drive change. And the focus for COP27 in Cairo, so an all Africa COP, it's resilience and adaptation, nature, and finance.
Yeah.
So you don't even have net zero, and I'm not belittling net zero. I know we have to get there, but the commitments are there. We know what the commitments are, and companies just need to implement their roadmaps and work towards a collective, goal of reducing your own 1, 2, 3 scope emissions. So in a way, it's almost like a given. Hold people's feet to the fire. You've got the GFANs, 120 trillion. Yeah, and some work needs to be done to how do you access that huge number. But work on that. But even if we make the commitments, like I was saying before, you're still at a 2C world.
Yeah.
So the focus on adaptation is a much harder one. The metrics aren't so much breakthrough technologies. It's how do you improve people's livelihoods. So that's why we like the ESG advisory. We're hoping that will be a thread that can be used to connect sectors. And I will say that the other thing right now for companies, and I think it's getting better, but have companies look at their value chain. So what we're doing for our company and the Climate Champions team is working with companies in other sectors to understand what they do, what they make, what they serve, and then how that overlaps with people, to be honest. So you look at that intersection, how they contribute and impact lives and livelihoods around adaptation. Now, it's hard to measure. We have a whole group working on the measurement part. But so that's a piece of it. And then the other piece, and this is what we're doing here, and it's in big organizations. So, you look at, I'll throw a couple names out there, P4G. They do amazing work. This Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, it's like a pathway that any sector can use to build better projects. A lot of what we do is, and I think this is a stumbling block, is the challenge of whenever you're doing anything, it's of what, like what are you building, to what, and for whom. So what are you building? What do you make? What does it have to be protected from, for whom? So it gets back to narrative. And the problem with right now with scaling, as Steve was mentioned, I mean, the technologies are out there. It's how do you democratize those and get those out? I'll give you the last example is this resilience screen work we did for the Rockefeller Foundation. It was a fairly simple screen you could run any project through, and it tells you, is it built to last? Can it benefit people? Not generate negative consequences? Generate measurement? And I'm supporting a fund now that's using that to drive $10 billion urban resilience fund to projects. So that's an open source fund. That's an open source tool. So get tools out there. I don't have an answer on how you do it, but get tools out there with sort of bodies like Climate Champions or other NGOs that can push it out. And not that finance is the answer, but if you start to have finance really put some teeth into their investments and what they want to see for metrics, for some sectors that could really join. And then the last one is what we recognize at the Climate Champions team is we have an initiative now called Mainstreaming Resilience. We're trying to bring resilience into every sector. So if you have a sector doing energy, look at resilience at the same time and drive it across horizontally sectors. So we just need more of that proof points and then push it out.
So just to give you a background, Peter and Steve, I have been a technology professional for 20 years and a very recent migrant into sustainability. And when I came into this space, I felt there were too many benchmarks, too many frameworks, too many reporting structures, too much of certifications. And, people are running after those awards and certifications. And here today in 2022, on 12th of May, we are saying we still lack a body. We need another forum or another body or another set of action people who could actually put things together into the right perspective, because these actions and these all kinds of bodies and forums which are driving these changes are probably failing at a macro level. They are probably doing something at a very micro level, and they do not see the interdependency across industries. So here is a chance for somebody else to again make millions. Please build some forum. And I don't know how to solve that, but yes, I see what you're saying. But then I have another question here as a new business in sustainability. So we speak to a lot of people, and interestingly, the newer businesses are still continuing to be in the same mindset of returns first or impact first. That continues to be a fight with the newer businesses. Now, the larger organizations have started to see value in being more adapting to more sustainable practices and adopting more sustainable practices. But the mid-size organizations, the smaller sizes organizations, which are more in numbers, which are more in terms of revenues also, and when you put together, and those organizations still continue to have that dilemma, like, what do we do? How do we contribute? I mean, we don't have resources to do that. We are focused on our returns. How do we handle that? Like, how do we make that? Because that's a mass. That's a bigger mass. The small and medium businesses, and startup world is a whole different animal again. So how do we kind of motivate them to join this or look at the IPCC report and please kind of have a change of heart or do something. How do we do that?
Great question. It's a really great question. It's a great discussion point. And yeah, I mean, I'll try and keep this short if possible, but I think it really, I mean, narrative is really crucial. How we frame this, the language we use, just the words that we use, the language we use to communicate to, whether it's citizens, whether it's students, whether it's C-suite executives, whether it's SMEs, whether it's, individuals running their own very, very small business. It needs to be a common language that we all understand. If you go to large climate conferences, sustainability conferences, and you take a step back, you're literally listening to super smart, super educated people with years of experience, literally talking an alien language. And you get journalists at these events writing articles for the mainstream media, and you read it in the mainstream media, and it's like the average person doesn't connect with the language. We need a common language. We need a nomenclature that takes it to the level where everybody can understand this. As an entrepreneur and as somebody that builds businesses, language is everything. If you can't frame your idea in a language that everybody understands, your mum, your grandmother, you're going to have real problems communicating your proposition. So I think there's a language challenge. I think the other challenge, which we've mentioned at the start of the call or earlier in the call in this webinar, is you need to be able to show small businesses, medium-sized businesses in the context of where they geographically trade. So going back to Peter's comments about taking this local, and because it's different, every part of the world has different needs. That's normal in business, but you need to be able to frame it in the context of individuals. And those individuals need to see their role in the big picture and the contribution they can make. So if you've got a small, medium enterprise, or you've got a 10-person company, or you've got a 3-person hairdressing salon, you need to see where you sit in the narrative, and then what can I do? And you need to make that very, very simple.
So, Steve, sorry to interrupt you here, but can SDGs be that language? Are SDGs that language?
I think the framework of the SDGs, and before the SDGs were the Millennium Development Goals, I think the framework of the SDGs is kind of okay if you look at the design and the framework. But then I think the language around the SDGs, it captures the imagination of such a tiny number of people. And unless you capture the imagination of people with something like the SDGs, you're going to really struggle for that message to be carried through all the different media and content and channels to reach the mass of people. That's unfortunate, because the people that are designing SDGs and many other things, their hearts are in the right place. They're doing really good work, but it is not connecting with Gen Z, millennials, people that are getting up every day and working 5, 6, 7 days a week to pay the rent. SDGs have no relevance in their world whatsoever. They're not in their frame of reference at all. And you have to be able to repackage the story so that it's contextually relevant to everybody and anybody, regardless of where they live. If you can't do that, then the design, albeit the design of the framework's good, but ultimately the design of the user experience absolutely sucks. It's broken. If it was a piece of technology, it would get no traction. It would be full of friction. It would have too much friction, and that really frustrates me. Because I know people that work on the SDGs. I know 2 researchers that have contributed massively to the IPCC reports. And I say to them, the way this is packaged up and presented, it's at a level, at the COP level and at the World Economic Forum level and the Davos level and on university campuses, it's okay. But that isn't how you're going to get 3 billion people on board with this. in a really short space of time. And that's a challenge. And it can't be, there's no silver bullet. It can't be, a live simulcast music event. It needs to be embedded into pop culture. It needs to be embedded into the narrative of everyday life for everybody. And if we can do that, we will stand a really good chance of getting things to a really good place. But right now, I've seen no evidence that we're on track for that. I see journalists doing great things, and I see broadcasters doing great things, but it's all siloed, and it's for fleeting moments in time. It needs to be all the time, and it needs to be woven in to the narrative of what is called pop culture, of contemporary culture.
So there is activism, but not enough action.
Yeah, and I think
activism
gets a bad rep, and it shouldn't. There's activism that isn't helping, and I believe there is, but there is also activism that is playing a pivotal role. Sorry, Peter, I'm going to shut up.
No, I mean, and so a couple things. One, both in our company, really direct focus on young professionals and their input as leaders to a company. That's changing. I can tell you, absolutely, that's changing. You look at the turnover rate. You look at the great resignation. Companies that don't address that won't function. And I tell you, even at the climate champion team, it's small, but I think it's a great test bed for how you succeed. We've got a really thriving, globally based youth core that are part of everything, and so it keeps us in touch with both the activism and what they're looking for, but then actions behind it. I can tell you that not that COP's everything, and being on that team, there are events every single month where they're rolling this out and they're working with key leaders and organizations. It's all around use cases. So here's an example. Here's how we're doing it, and then you use that to scale. To your question before, SMEs, I think it's a huge challenge. So we have within our company, and then we're working with other organizations, have incubator labs, so test labs, and that's a great way to get SMEs involved, especially if there's an innovative technology. So one I'm working with now, Climate Kick, if you're aware of that, great work, and they're setting up things in developed countries that are similar to Silicon Valley, like startup incubators around climate. So what it does is it brings in other big players, brings in a Google, a Facebook, a Nestle, whatever, around a common challenge with technology, and then they always have a finance or an insurance sector in there. So you have levers to get involved that can finance and scale it, but then you get the voices of SMEs. I just got off a call today on what the food shortage is going to look like by 2050. So we work through an example of what do we want it to look like? Who are the players? How do we get those players involved? That's just around one challenge, but they do that around challenges, and then they bring in other sectors. So it gets back to collaboration, and it's a small thing, but in the financial sector, this nature-based disclosure, I think could be a really nice driver. I think TCFD is going to be a driver, especially as companies start to not just know what their risk is, but then look at how they can go from in to out. So how what they do pushes out. And it gets really wonky with acronyms, but I think this ISSB thing is going to pull together all these frameworks under one umbrella, hopefully within the year, and that's going to start to accelerate, I'm hopeful, the work.
Absolutely. A great initiative, by the way, Peter. I think more and more such large organizations should take up this kind of initiatives to involve more SMEs. I think that could be a good leverage. Yeah. Quite a few of them have, I've seen a trend of this supplier sustainability thing, wherein larger organizations want to work with on the sustainable suppliers, and kind of it has started to drive some awareness at least. I mean, not many people opt for it, not many people want to get audited for it. I've seen that too. But at least that started to bring some awareness and drive some change in the smaller and medium organizations, and hopefully that works better. So I think I'll just very quickly, since we are into the last 5 minutes, I'm going to very quickly take questions. There's one question for you, Steve. It says, how do we add sustainability at the heart of existing businesses? I think you spoke about it at length. So I'll probably skip this for now unless you want to add more points to it.
No, I think Peter touched on a point that I just wanted to kind of talk about for a minute or so, and that's I think Peter, my interpretation of what you said about open source is also really rethinking IP and how we make IP more accessible. I mean, clearly that has huge implications on business model. It has huge implications on competitive advantage. But I know we have arrived at a moment in time when competitors, it's very similar to what we saw with the COVID vaccine and how we went from knowing we were going to have a need for a vaccine and the willingness and the will to push that through at warp speed, it happened. There was collaboration between pharma companies. There was collaboration between pharma companies' supply chains, value chain. And I think we need to look at that as a big beacon of hope. We've experienced in the last 2 years an example of what happens when global pharma companies kind of realize that if they can pull this off, it's going to create huge amounts of shareholder return. But to pull it off, they've got to have closed-door meetings between themselves to figure out, okay, we can crack the code, we can create the vaccines. The biggest challenge is the go-to-market. How do we now scale up supply chain in order to get this into the hands of enough people really fast? We know we can do it when there's that will and when the need is super urgent. Humans have the capacity, the ambition. We love challenges. It's why we explore. It's why we climb mountains. And we need to see more of that. And unfortunately, I think we haven't yet experienced a big enough catastrophic climate-related event that unfortunately we'll see 500 million people not survive for people to realize that this is the moment when competitors and everybody has to collaborate. I think it's going to necessitate something that is not good for people to finally wake up, for the business as usual. Let's see if we can keep going with the ESG. We need to go beyond that, but I don't think there's enough will at the moment. There certainly isn't enough political will, not at the scale that's required to achieve this. But we have to get into the mindset of open source, sharing, collaborating, and we are going to have to figure out what the ROI business models are around that. And we have the capacity to do that. Yeah. Peter.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Peter, there is a question for you now.
Yep.
How is this IPCC organized around like the working groups? And then how do people, what's this COP27 about?
I'm not super involved in how the science and the works go. I think they're, the IPCC work in general, right? It's you captured it before. It's it's a UN body. I mean, it has 3 working groups. So there's one on physical science, which I think is I would think largely out there, although it's going to change over time. So they keep working adaptation to impacts. That's the space I'm in more, and then also mitigation. So on those 3 working groups, that's where they push. And to relate it to COP27, this next one is going to. The goal is to really elevate. In fact, that's the work I'm doing now, is mainstreaming resilience. So how do we really step change in adaptation alongside energy? Because if we just reach even 1.5. You look at the impacts in 1.5, you've got 2.8 to 3.2 billion people who are still going to face fairly frequent climate shocks, heat, flooding, landslides, fire. So even in a 1.5 world, it's still going to be there. So we have to do the 2 together. So COP27, what they do is it's to affect policy. It's to roll out use cases. It's to allow the global south to really step change partnerships around key partnerships. And then you think of it as it's your roadmap for the future. It's your roadmap to 2030, and there's a lot of accountability. It brings together, like Steve was saying, a ton of stakeholders. industry, policy people. So, yeah, it's having been at Glasgow, it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's the world's largest climate gathering, but it's all about driving outputs. And the cool thing is finance is right in the middle of it. So you've got all the big finances there.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, that's a topic. I don't know how excited you are, Steve, about it, but I'm very excited to probably follow up this with Peter and figure it out how we can be at COP27. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely an experience. A lot of people tell me that that's an experience to go to, and you actually build up so many networks when you come back, and you can work as a bigger force. So, good luck to you, Peter, for your contributions there. Good luck to you, Steve, and thank you so much for joining us. I think this wasn't enough, at least not for me personally. I think I would really love to deep dive into certain areas of decarbonization, of maybe how do we build resilient cities. And there are more topics that I would really want to deep dive into, talking to you both again. So I'm looking forward to that discussion again. But for now, thank you so much, everyone who joined us. And thank you, Steve and Peter, again. And look forward to collaborating again. Yes, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Smita.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Yep.
Bye-bye.
Keep up the great work. Bye.
Likewise. Bye-bye.